It's a universally shared experience. You're just standing there in your bathroom holding that little orange plastic bottle.
Right, everybody knows that bottle.
Yeah, exactly. And you read your name, you see, take one tablet daily. Maybe you notice that little yellow sticker telling you not to drink alcohol. And you just think, well, great, I've read the drug label. I know exactly what's going on. It feels incredibly straightforward.
It does. It definitely projects that illusion, right? But the reality is quite different. When you look at that orange bottle, you are staring at the very surface of this massive, deeply nested system of information.
And confusing the layers of that system isn't just, a matter of semantics.
No, not at all. It is actually one of the most common sources of medication errors in the entire world.
Which is wild. So today, our mission for this deep dive is decoding the essentials of that system. We are going to completely dismantle everything you think you know about reading a drug label.
We really are.
Yeah, and to do this, we're pulling from this huge stack of FDA regulatory histories, pharmaceutical case law, and, modern pharmacovigilance data. Because what you are actually holding in your hand isn't just a list of ingredients.
No, it's a highly contested legal contract.
Right.
It's a history of public health disasters, and it's this constantly evolving map of real-world data.
Right. And to understand why a label is built this way, I think we have to start with this concept of information asymmetry.
Yeah, information asymmetry is the core of all this.
Yeah.
Because, the manufacturer of a drug has run, or at least they've funded, these massive clinical trials.
So they have all the data.
Exactly. They possess exponentially more knowledge about the drug's risks, its side effects, and its efficacy than you do as the patient.
Well, and they know more about it than your doctor or your pharmacist, right?
Precisely. The label, at its very core, is just the legally mandated mechanism to force the transfer of that knowledge downstream to the people actually taking the risk.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if the ultimate goal is to, transfer that knowledge accurately, we really need to address the biggest misconception that you, listening right now, probably have about that bottle in your medicine cabinet.
And it's a big one.
It is. Because what you are looking at, that printed sticker on the vial with your name on it, it is not the official FDA-approved label.
Yeah, that throws a lot of people off. I mean, that retail label, the vial label, is just generated locally by your pharmacy software.
Just printed right there behind the counter.
Right. It's primarily based on the prescriber's SIG, which is just medical shorthand for the directions for use.
Okay, so it has your name, the drug name, the strength, refills, stuff like that.
Yeah, the prescriber's info and something called a NBC, the National Drug Code. But the NDC is essentially just this unique numeric identifier for that exact product and package size. I mean, it's logistics, not pharmacology.
Wait, okay, but what about those little, those colorful auxiliary warning stickers? The ones that are like, may cause drowsiness or, take with food. I would just assume those came straight from some federal regulator in Washington.
A lot of people do.
Yeah.
But no, those are actually added by the pharmacy system based on the drug's general profile.
Really?
Yeah. They serve as helpful reminders, but they are not dictated word for word by the FDA.
Yeah.
The actual legally binding FDA-negotiated document is something else entirely.
And that's the package insert, right?
Yes. Formally, we call it the full prescribing information, the FPI, or sometimes just the drug monograph.
So just to put this in perspective for everyone, thinking that the sticker on your vial is the official FDA label is basically like mistaking the shipping label on a cardboard box for the actual comprehensive user manual inside.
That is a great analogy.
Right. Like the shipping label just gets the box to your house, but the manual tells you how the machine actually works.
The user manual is exactly how you should think about it, especially considering just how rigorous the FPI is. I mean, every single sentence in that monograph has been heavily scrutinized.
Like legally scrutinized.
Heavily. It is reviewed, approved, or explicitly required by FDA regulators. A manufacturer absolutely cannot claim an unapproved use in that document, and they are legally barred from omitting a required warning.
Which makes sense.
Right. And today, it follows this strict, standardized structure with up to 17 numbered sections.
Wow, 17.
Yeah, it covers literally everything from indications and dosage to contraindications, adverse reactions, use in specific populations, you name it.
But, looking at our sources on the regulatory history here, it's pretty clear this highly structured 17-section legal document wasn't just handed down from on high on day one.
Oh, definitely not.
And here's where it gets really interesting to me, because getting to this level of detail took a century of trial, error, and literal tragedy.
Yes, it did.
These weren't just proactive bureaucratic updates by some committee. Every major labeling law essentially followed a body count. Are you saying that for decades, safe wasn't even rigorously defined by the government?
That is exactly what I'm saying. We actually go through 3 very distinct eras to get to today's label. And yeah, in the beginning, safety just wasn't on the radar at all.
So where do we start?
The first era is the Truth in Labeling era from about 1906 to 1937. So the 1906 Pure Food and Drug Act was prompted by muckraking journalism.
Oh, right. Upton Sinclair's book, The Jungle.
Exactly. It exposed those horrific adulteration practices in the meat industry. That, combined with the relentless advocacy of this guy, Harvey Washington Wiley at the Bureau of Chemistry, pushed Congress to act.
Okay, but the resulting law, it only banned misbranding, right?
Pretty much.
Meaning, as long as a company didn't outright lie on the label about what ingredients were in the bottle, they were, like, legally in the clear.
Yeah, essentially, you could sell a completely untested drug. The government didn't require you to prove it actually worked, and more shockingly, you didn't have to prove it was safe for human consumption.
Which feels like it's just setting the stage for an absolute disaster.
It was inevitable, and it happened in 1937. The S.E. Massengill Company wanted to create a liquid version of this really popular antibiotic for children.
The elixir sulfanilamide.
Right. So to make the drug dissolve into a sweet, raspberry-flavored liquid, their chief chemist used a solvent called diethylene glycol.
And for anyone who doesn't know, diethylene glycol is literally a chemical relative of antifreeze.
It is a deadly poison.
But because there was no legal requirement to run safety tests before putting a drug on the market, they just bottled it and shipped it out.
That is just... ugh.
Yeah, over 100 people, and the vast majority of them were young children, died agonizing death from acute kidney failure.
God, that's horrific.
It was a wake-up call. That specific tragedy snapped the country to attention and directly birthed the safety labeling era.
So Congress finally stepped in. Yes. The following year, they passed the 1938 Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. For the first time, manufacturers actually had to submit safety data before marketing a drug. And the FDA was finally empowered to reject unsafe products.
But, okay, even with that huge leap forward, reading the history, there was still this massive loophole. Because they had to prove the drug wouldn't kill you, but they still didn't have to prove it actually did what it claimed to do on the label.
I know, it's hard to believe now. But efficacy wasn't a legal requirement until the next major disaster ushered in the third era, the safety and efficacy era.
And this is the thalidomide story, right?
Yes. In the late 1950s and early 60s, this drug called thalidomide was marketed in dozens of countries. It was sold as a sedative and an anti-nausea drug.
And they thought it was perfectly safe.
They deemed it so safe that it was aggressively prescribed to pregnant women for morning sickness. But the catastrophic result was that it caused severe birth defects, primarily these limb malformations known as phocomelia, in thousands of infants worldwide.
But this was a global tragedy where the United States actually largely avoided the worst of it.
We did, thankfully.
And looking at the sources, that was due to, like, one specific person holding the line at the FDA.
Yes, Dr. Frances Oldham Kelsey. She was a relatively new FDA medical officer, and she was the one handed the thalidomide application.
And she just wouldn't prove it.
Exactly. Despite immense corporate pressure to just rubber stamp this thing, she repeatedly refused. She had noticed some reports of peripheral neuropathy-like nerve damage in adults taking the drug overseas.
So she demanded more data.
She demanded more safety data regarding its effect on fetuses specifically. And her stubbornness spared the U.S. from the massive scale of harm seen in Europe.
And in the aftermath of all that, they passed the 1962 Kefauver-Harris Amendment, which finally gives the label some real teeth.
It transformed the entire industry. It required manufacturers to provide substantial evidence of a drug's efficacy through well-controlled clinical trials.
So it actually has to work now.
Right. It also mandated informed consent in those trials. And crucially for our topic today, it drastically tightened what claims could appear on a label. It required the explicit disclosure of side effects and contraindications.
Okay, so if we step back for a second, the label evolved from this bare minimum liability shield, basically just protecting the manufacturer from being sued for fraud, into a highly structured risk communication tool meant to protect the patient.
That's exactly the trajectory.
But reading through these early monographs from back then, I mean, they were basically unreadable. If doctors are busy, how were they supposed to find the actual risks buried in, like, pages of microscopic legalese.
Well, for a long time, they struggled. They really did. The FDA eventually had to concede that, while the label was legally comprehensive, it was totally failing as a practical communication device.
Right, because a doctor doesn't have time to read a novel while you're sitting on the exam table.
Exactly. That realization drove the modern readability reforms. In 1999, we got the OTC drug facts rule. That gave us that very clear, standardized box on the back of Tylenol or Advil.
Oh, yeah, the one heavily modeled after the nutrition facts panel on food.
Precisely. And then for prescription drugs, they followed suit in 2006 with the physician labeling rule, or PLR.
And that introduced the highlight section.
Yes, they put a highlight section right at the very top of the monograph. It's this plain language bulleted summary so a doctor can get the critical info in like 30 seconds.
Which brings us to arguably the most misunderstood part of that summary, and honestly, the entire monograph.
Yeah.
The boxed warning, or, as most people call it, the black box warning.
This is such a critical point because when patients, or honestly even some clinicians, see a black box warning, the immediate reaction is often just panic.
Oh, absolutely.
The assumption is that it functions like a danger ranking, that a boxed warning automatically means the drug is inherently toxic or should be avoided at all costs.
So what does this all actually mean in practice? Because it sounds like a skull and crossbones to the average person.
What's fascinating here is that the reality is far more nuanced. The FDA uses the boxed warning to flag specific, serious, and often reversible, if caught early, risks.
Okay, reversible if caught early.
Right. It is a tool for targeted vigilance, not a blanket prohibition.
Okay, so it's not a giant red S-Stocky sign for everybody. It's more like a highly specific radar ping for a very specific demographic.
That captures the intent perfectly. A radar ping. Let's look at a concrete example from the source material. In 2004, the FDA reviewed all this pooled data from various pediatric antidepressant trials.
And what did they find?
They found a specific, really concerning signal: an increased risk of suicidal thinking and behavior in patients under the age of 25.
Under 25.
Yes. And because of this, they mandated a boxed warning for all antidepressants, including very common SSRIs.
But the crucial distinction here is that the warning wasn't saying, hey, this drug is hazardous and nobody should take it. It was pointing to a population-specific signal buried in the aggregate data, essentially telling doctors, watch this specific age group closely.
Yes, exactly. And it's really worth noting that in 2007, the FDA refined that warning to clarify the risk window. And importantly, they added a statement about the severe risks of leaving depression untreated.
Which is a huge factor.
Right. This highlights the first principle of reading a drug label. A warning encodes a specific finding from specific data. Reading it correctly requires paying attention to who the risk applies to, not just the fact that a risk exists.
Because plenty of drugs have these warnings, right?
Oh, tons. Many drugs with boxed warnings, like metformin, which is used by millions of people for diabetes, are extremely safe standards of care when used appropriately.
Right. The boxed warning shows us exactly how precise the label gets about risks. But I want to pivot to something that totally surprised me in our research.
Oh, what's that?
What happens when the label is entirely silent?
Ah, yes.
Because we've established that the monograph is this rigorous legal document, but there's this massive durable gap between what a label officially says a drug does and how doctors actually use that drug in the real world.
You're referring to off-label prescribing.
Yes.
Right. So the indications and usage section of the label only lists the uses that the manufacturer has formally proven to the FDA's satisfaction.
Okay.
But proving an indication is an incredibly expensive, multi-year process involving massive clinical trials.
So a doctor can legally prescribe a drug for an unlisted purpose, an off-label use, just based on their clinical judgment and, peer-reviewed medical literature.
Absolutely. It happens all the time.
But the pharmaceutical company can't legally market or promote that use because it's not on the printed label.
That is the legal line in the sand. And off-label prescribing is standard practice in many medical fields. In oncology, psychiatry, pediatrics,
Yeah.
it is incredibly common.
It's just so interesting.
Yeah, many well-established life-saving treatments are technically off-label simply because no pharmaceutical company wanted to spend tens of millions of dollars to officially add the indication to the label, especially if the drug is older and no longer patent protected.
See, this is such a huge perspective shift for a patient. If your doctor prescribes something and you go home, you read the label, and your condition isn't even listed on there, it doesn't necessarily mean there's an absolute benefit. It might just mean nobody funded the paperwork.
Exactly. The label reflects the intersection of science, economics, and regulation. And that tension gets even more complex and, frankly, a bit strange when we look at generic drugs and something called skinny labels.
Okay, I really want to dig into this because it sounds like a legal magic trick. Let me just make sure I understand the mechanics here first.
Go for it.
A generic drug has to prove bioequivalence, right? It has to be chemically identical to the brand name drug, and it has to absorb and act the exact same way in the human body.
Yes, bioequivalence is the foundational rule for any generic drug approval.
But legally, generic manufacturers can carve out or omit patent-protected indications from their printed labels.
They can.
They do this to get their generic version on the market faster for the uses that are no longer protected by patents. So I could have two chemically identical pills acting the exact same way in my bloodstream, but legally, their formal labels say they treat completely different things, all because of a patent loophole.
It sounds bizarre, but it is a standard regulatory pathway. This legal fiction was actually the center of a massive fight. The GlaxoSmithKline versus Teva lawsuit over the heart failure drug carvedilol.
Okay, break that down for us.
So GSK had a patent on using the drug for congestive heart failure. Teva brought a generic to market with a skinny label that intentionally skipped the heart failure indication, only listing other cardiovascular uses that were off patent.
So Teva's saying, look, our label doesn't say it treats heart failure, so we aren't infringing on your patent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But GSK argued that even with the skinny label, Teva was still implicitly promoting the patented use.
Because doctors know it's the same drug.
Right. Because of overlapping information left in other sections of the document, and because doctors inherently know the generic does the exact same thing as the brand name,
Wow.
it resulted in years of complex litigation about how much a skinny label actually protects a generic maker from liability. It perfectly illustrates that while a drug is a chemical reality, its label is fundamentally a legal construct.
And the problem with a legal construct is that it's inherently static, right? Yeah, at least in the short term. Because once a drug is out in the wild, being taken by millions of people in uncontrolled environments, the label has to keep up with reality.
It does.
And history shows us that sometimes the printed word fails to do that fast enough.
Which brings us to a moment that completely shook the medical world.
Yeah.
The Vioxx disaster.
Yeah, this was huge.
Merck developed a drug called rofecoxib, marketed as Vioxx. It was a KIOX2 inhibitor, which is a type of anti-inflammatory drug designed to treat arthritis and pain without causing the severe stomach ulcers you'd get from older NSAIDs like ibuprofen.
And it was approved in 1999, right?
Yes, and it became an absolute blockbuster. Millions of prescriptions.
But then the real-world data started rolling in, and cardiovascular risk signals like heart attacks and strokes started showing up, even in Merck's own trial data, specifically this study called the VIGOR trial.
Right, and the drug's label was revised over time to add caution language, but critics argued those updates were dangerously slow and watered down.
Yeah.
In 2004, an FDA safety reviewer named Dr. David Graham gave this widely reported explosive testimony to the U.S. Senate. He argued that the label changes lagged badly behind the accumulating real-world evidence, effectively understating the cardiovascular risks to the public for years.
And Merck ended up voluntarily withdrawing Vioxx from the market in September of 2004, didn't they?
They did.
And the human cost of that delay was just staggering. Dr. Graham estimated that the sluggish response resulted in tens of thousands of excess cardiovascular events in the U.S. alone.
Yeah. While Merck and various analysts debated the precise statistical figures, the core regulatory failure was undeniable. Vioxx remains the canonical modern example of a monograph's warning language, utterly failing to keep pace with real-world risk.
Which really proves that sometimes just updating the text on a piece of paper isn't enough to keep people safe.
It forced a massive reckoning at the FDA. This raises an important question. Is a static, text-based label ever sufficient risk communication for a genuinely dangerous drug?
And the answer was no.
Exactly. After Vioxx, Congress passed the Food and Drug Administration Amendments Act of 2007. This created the REMIS System Risk Evaluation and Mitigation Strategy.
What does that actually do?
For certain high-risk drugs, the FDA can now mandate behavioral controls layered on top of the label.
Oh, like the IPL-EDGI program for that severe acne drug, isotretinoin.
Yes, perfect example.
Because it causes severe birth defects, you can't just hand someone a label that says, don't get pregnant and hope for the best. Prescribers, pharmacies, and patients all have to be registered in a central database to actively ensure pregnancy prevention through testing and birth control.
You have to actively manage the risk. The text is no longer enough.
So, truly reading a label means understanding the ongoing living system behind it, like Pharmacovigilance.
Post-market surveillance is the absolute engine of drug safety. Programs like the FDA's MedWatch allow doctors and patients to report adverse events.
Anyone can report to it.
Yes, this is the real-world data that feeds back into label updates. And understanding this leads to another major misconception. Patients often assume that a drug with a really short warning section is inherently safer than a drug with pages of warnings.
I love the analogy of buying a car for this. Like, a newly approved drugs label is short not because it's inherently safer, but because it's totally untested in the wild. It's like buying the very first run of a brand new car model versus buying a model that's been on the road for 10 years. The older car comes with a much longer manual and way more recall notices, not because it's worse, but because you actually know what to watch out for. The new car is just a mystery.
It's a vital distinction. Older drugs simply have more real-world data behind them.
Right.
We are actually seeing this dynamic play out in real time right now with GLP-1 agonists drugs like semaglutide and tirzepatide.
Right, these are the drugs everyone is talking about for weight loss, which mimic a hormone to slow down digestion and make you feel full.
Exactly. Much of their massive public use right now, for certain formulations anyway, is technically off-label for weight loss. And as millions of people use them, flooding the system with all this new data, we're seeing live label updates for rare but serious risks, like reports of gastroparesis or severe stomach paralysis.
Wow.
The pharmacovigilance data is accumulating right before our eyes, and the label is living, breathing, and changing to reflect it.
And regulators are constantly tweaking how this information is presented to overcome human error, too. I was really fascinated by this thing called tall man lettering, where they intentionally mix capitalization on the label.
Oh yeah, that's a great safety tool.
Writing hydroxyzine and hydralazine with random capital letters just to visually jar a pharmacist or nurse so they don't accidentally mix up sound-alike names.
Or consider the 2015 Pregnancy and Lactation Labeling Rule, the PLLR. For decades, the FDA used a really blunt A, B, C, D, X letter grade system to summarize the risk to a fetus.
Which seems terribly reductive, like a complex medical decision boiled down to a single letter grade.
It was heavily criticized for exactly that reason. It conflated very different kinds of evidence, or even the sheer absence of evidence, into one single letter.
So what did they do?
The PLLR replaced that letter grade with a required narrative summary of the actual risk data. It was a rare moment of the FDA admitting that their previous framework for reading pregnancy risk had basically misled more than it clarified. It all comes back to health literacy and medication reconciliation, ensuring the right patient gets the right understanding of the right drug at the right time.
We've covered a massive amount of ground today, and honestly, it really changes how you look at that little orange bottle in your bathroom.
I hope so.
You realize the sticker with your name on it is just a shipping label from the pharmacy. The actual user manual, the monograph, is this intense legal contract where every single warning was practically written in blood, shaped by tragedies like elixir sulfanilamide and thalidomide.
Absolutely.
We've seen that off-label use isn't inherently dangerous. It's really just a byproduct of how expensive clinical trials are. And a black box warning isn't a skull and crossbones. It's a highly specific radar ping.
Most importantly, you realize that the label is never truly finished. Warnings accumulate post-approval through pharmacovigilance.
Right.
Because of this, an older drug's label is often far more detailed and, frankly, far more trustworthy regarding safety than a newly approved wonder drug.
So the next time you are standing in your bathroom holding that little orange bottle, looking at that seemingly simple sticker, think about the data that isn't there yet. If the label is a living document and post-market surveillance is what updates it, to what extent are we, the patients out here in the real world, taking these medications, silently writing the future editions of the very manuals we're relying on today?
We have the clinical trial now.
That is something to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.